Welcome to the 2019 Wilderness Issues Lecture Series. Yeah. The Wilderness Lecture Series is a program sponsored by and run by the Wilderness Institute, which is a university institute housed within the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation. And I wanted to give you just a little bit of background about the Wilderness Institute. First, let me tell you who I am. My name is Andrew Larson. I'm a forest ecologist in the Department of Forest Management, and I've just joined the Wilderness Institute as the new director. So, it's good to be here. The Wilderness Institute is a research, education, and public service-oriented organization. We're right in line with the university's mission along those three core pillars. And it's important to recognize that we are not in the advocacy business. We are in the education and science and communication business. We have some critical partners here on the University of Montana campus. We partner with the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute and the Arthur Carhart National Wilderness Training Center. Those are two interagency, federal agency offices that represent the research and training arms of the federal wilderness management agencies. Just a little bit about our programs. I know most of you are familiar with our flagship educational program, Wilderness and Civilization. This lecture series is part of that. We also offer through the Wilderness Institute a graduate certificate in wilderness management, and we've got growing wilderness research programs. We've got active graduate student research going on in wilderness management and human use impacts, as well as looking into human dimensions of recent policy changes like the designation of the East Rosebud Creek as a wild and scenic river. And what's that mean for the communities and people that live in that environment? So what this means for you and your friends and colleagues is that our doors are open and we want to engage with you, and we're here to help you meet your wilderness needs and to partner with you in research and education and service missions. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Joanna Campbell, our Director of Educational Programs at the Wilderness Institute. Joanna will introduce tonight's speaker and also take you through a little bit of the orientation to the class.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. It's just great to be here tonight and see so many familiar faces and new faces. I'd also like to welcome the general public and thank you for coming tonight on a frosty, chilly, icy night. And also I'd like to acknowledge the generous support of NCAT who's here recording, and those lectures will be made available on the website eventually, right? And I hope all of you can stay after the talk because there will be time for discussion. So this year's series is titled Wild Hope. Fearless risk takers, art makers, and storytellers on the wilderness and conservation front lines. This theme emerged from observing a confluence of social, political, and environmental trends underway. Turn on the news, scroll on your smartphone, click on a link. We've seen tremendous upheaval and change in the last few years. Whether it's our political climate or the literal climate, we are living in a tense period where being a researcher comes with higher risks, or being an advocate demands and inspires greater creativity. Phrases like climate fatigue, news fatigue are now part of our cultural lexicon. This lecture series explores the stories of what people have done to stay resilient and productive. It explores the edges of what it means to honor one's work, whether as a federal land manager or an Episcopal bishop with an eye for climate change. And while wilderness is the heart of our education and our research and outreach at the Wilderness Institute, I purposefully decided to go beyond wilderness for this lecture series because hope is not siloed. Hope needs space to roam. Hope is both and, wilderness and conservation. One fearless author and activist, Rebecca Solnit, writes, "Hope is an embrace of the unknown." And that, perhaps, is one of the great challenges we have, to step forward bravely with hope, even when we don't have all the answers, or the answers we have are unpopular, or we are a woman, a person of color, a gender or sexual orientation not recognized or protected. To have a wild hope is to believe not only in our ability for good, but also in the rights of those without a voice, the land, the water, the trees, of those seeking refuge, of those who are invisible, of the vast wild communities still here, still remaining, despite the many efforts to diminish a fundamental and defining part of our American DNA. And that is, whether we realize it or not, we are part of the land. And in the words of my colleague, Professor Bill Borey, perhaps wilderness needs us just as much as we need wilderness. To embrace the unknown is to embrace the wild, to step forward even when our voice trembles. It is our great necessity. So I hope that kind of sets the tone for you about what this lecture series is about. And Connie Myers is with us tonight, who I can't think of a better person to kick this off with. Connie is the recently retired founding director of the interagency Arthur Carhart National Wilderness Training Center that provides wilderness training, information, and education to wilderness managers and the public. Since establishment in 1993 and through interagency collaboration and partnerships, the Carhart Center team has provided training and coaching, information and advice, and education and outreach to more than 30,000 federal employees, volunteers, teachers, and kindergarten through college students nationally and internationally. Yay! Man! 25 challenging years after establishment, Connie and the Carhart team still believe that no matter how difficult, interagency collaboration is the right thing to do for taxpayers of the United States and for the wilderness resource they have entrusted into our care. It's a privilege, Connie said, to work with and for agency and non-agency wilderness managers and equip them to honor the promise of an enduring resource of wilderness. Connie holds a BS in Natural Resources Management from the University of Tennessee at Martin, an MS in Wildlife Biology from Michigan State University, and an MA in Communications from Michigan State University. Please welcome Connie Myers.
Jana, thank you so much for inviting me. This is just a pretty special opportunity to be here to talk about the hard things, right? Wilderness is so cool, and we think everybody's going to love it, and everybody's going to love us. And we find out, like I did when I started work with the Forest Service, I thought everybody liked Smokey Bear. And I didn't know that that was not true. You know, I've had the honor and the privilege to spend time visiting with a lot of different audiences, some quite a bit larger than this. But this one's pretty special. It's special for two reasons. One, in this audience are federal agency employees who have been furloughed now for 30 days. I would like you guys to stand, please, and be acknowledged. Come on. Stand up. And all of them work in wilderness. And the other reason is that we have the future coming up right here. Here they are. You guys, I hope you're not going to be standing here furloughed, 30 years from now, after 30 days. But what I want to do with the time that we have is talk about what do you do when the going gets tough? How do you respond when you get furloughed? This is my fourth time, I think, only I don't have to be furloughed this time because I'm retired. But I've been through 3 of these before now, And they're not fun and they're not easy. Why? Because one reason you're told you're non-essential. Oh, that makes you feel good. That's great for morale, isn't it? But what are you going to do? So, to kind of set the stage here, I need 3 volunteers. Do I have 3 volunteers to come up front here? Anybody? Somebody? Anybody? Right there. Come on. 2. There we go. 1 more. 3. Awesome. I want you to open this up and tell me what's in here.
An egg.
An egg. I would like you to open this up and tell me what's in here. Slide on over here.
A carrot.
I would like you to open this up and tell me what's in here.
Coffee beans?
Coffee beans. What happens when you expose an egg, a carrot, and coffee to boiling water for 20 minutes? Would you go ahead and crack that egg into that? I asked a high school kid to do this, and he grabbed it like this. I'm like, no, that's not what I mean by cracking the egg. Okay, now, let's go. You can just dump it in there. Now, what do we see? We see that the shell is solid enough to protect the soft, malleable, pliable center, right? Now, what happens after it's been boiled for 20 minutes? Crack that one. We know what happens, don't we? The shell's the same. The shell's the same. You don't have to peel it. The shell's the same. But that soft, pliable, malleable interior is now hard, right? Got bitter. Isn't functioning very well. Okay, show me that carrot. Can you bust that carrot in half? Snap. Okay, what happens when we boil it for 20 minutes? What happens? You want to bust that in half? She's like, no. Squish. So, the carrot originally was hard and resilient, and it could withstand anything, right? Until it got exposed to that tough time. And then it fell apart. It turned to mush. And what happens when we take coffee beans and we expose them to boiling water? Smell it?
Can I drink it too?
You can drink it. It's going to be kind of lukewarm, though. Go ahead. Is it really coffee?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Checks out.
not only when the coffee was exposed to that kind of pressure and that kind of stress and that kind of heat, it didn't change so much as it changed the environment it was in, right? And not only that, to get from this to this, what did it have to do? It had to be ground up hard, y'all. So what are you getting out of this? What are you getting out of this? Hard times can result in one of 3 things. Are you going to be an egg? Are you going to be a carrot? Are you going to be coffee? Thanks, you guys. Appreciate it. So what we're going to take a look at is, I want to be coffee. How do you be coffee? So to figure that out and to take a look at that in the time we have remaining, we're going to take a look at lessons we can learn from the conservation giants that have gone before us. We're going to take a look at what it really means to be a wilderness steward to begin with. And then we're going to take a look at why does it even matter. Does that make sense? A yes would be yes. All right, here we go now. So, conservation giants that have gone before us. The armistice was signed in 1918. And among the troops that came marching home was Arthur Carhart. And more than anything in the world, Arthur Carhart wanted to go to work for the National Park Service. So he's in Washington, D.C. He walks into the headquarters of the Park Service. He gets an audience, and they ask him, well, what's your background? And he says, I'm a landscape architect. Now think about this. The Park Service says, we kind of got that whole landscape thing taken care of. You might want to go visit with the folks over at the National Parks, or the Forest Service. They could use some help in that whole landscape architecture and whatnot. So he does. He goes over to the Forest Service and he gets an audience with then Assistant Chief of the Forest Service, who happened to go to the same college that Arthur Carhart did, Iowa. And he makes his pitch and says, hey, I want to go to work for you guys. And the Associate Chief says, hey, great, but we don't really need a landscape architect here in Washington, D.C. You need to apply to the regions out in the hinterlands. And so he did. Long story short, he starts to work in Denver, Colorado in 1919 in the summer. His first assignment was to survey a road into and around Trappers Lake with the purpose of establishing recreational cabins that would be rented out. And so think about this. Arthur Carhart's about like a GS 1/2, right? And he's a probationary employee. If you don't know this, you know, your first year they could like axe you with no, just a good reason. So he does his job like any good employee would do, and then he walks into his boss's office and he lays down the report and he looks at his boss and he says, you know what, I just don't think we should do this. And his boss says, well, why not? He says, well, I think that these lands would be better off if they were managed just like they are. Because if we put a road in there and we put cabins on there, only the people that can afford to rent the cabins can come, and it's going to totally change the dynamic of the place. And his boss said, you know, there's this other guy that's thinking kind of along the same lines you are. You two ought to get together and have a conversation about this. And so it was on December 6th, 1919, that Arthur Carhart and Aldo Leopold sat down in Denver, Colorado to have a conversation about managing lands in their natural state. And after it was all over, Aldo Leopold asked Arthur, why don't you reduce to writing some of the salient points of our conversation? And it was a 3-page memo. And here is a paragraph out of that memo. It is one of the most significant records, the first written record that we're aware of this whole notion of the history of the wilderness concept. There's a limit to the number of lands of shoreline on the lakes. There's a limit to the number of lakes in existence. There's a limit to the mountainous areas of the world. And there are portions of natural scenic beauty which are God-made and which of a right should be the property of all people. So, what I'd like to do right now is explore a couple of lessons that well, 3 actually, that we can gain from this story of Arthur Carhart meeting Aldo Leopold. First lesson, you have got to capture the opportunities that are afforded to you when they come. You have to be ready for it. He didn't see it coming, that he was going to be able to tell his boss, you should do something different. He didn't know that that was going to happen. He was ready, though, when it did. So the whole point here is that he captured the opportunity to tell it like it is. So what's the saying? Power corrupts power and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is that how it goes? So if you are willing to speak truth to power, even if you're a GS 1/2, you can change the world. But you've got to have the courage to do that. And one of the interesting things is that that's harder to do the longer you're in the game. Why would that be? Anybody have an idea why that would be? Status. What do you mean?
You have more to lose if you have high status.
Absolutely. You got a whole heck of a lot more to lose. If you've been in the game for 20 years, you probably have a wife or a husband and kids and all sorts of responsibilities that you didn't have before. So you're going to be like, maybe I shouldn't say anything. So you need to be ready for that. So the first lesson that resonates with me is to tell it like it is, and I wanted to share with you a personal story. Jack Ward Thomas was a former chief of the Forest Service, and after him came Mike Dombeck. I think that was the order it went in. And Mike Dombeck was coming to Missoula. Mike was a chief. I'm a Forest Service employee as the director of the Carhart Center. Things were not looking well. Well, good, whatever, in the Forest Service with wilderness stewardship at that time. Okay? They just weren't. We weren't in that same awesome leadership role, moving things forward, moving the ball, and that sort of thing. So I called up Jack Thomas and I said, hey, Jack, I understand that you're having breakfast with Mike Dombeck tomorrow. Put in a few good words for wilderness, will you? And he goes, why don't you come to breakfast with us? I'm like, me? Really? Seriously? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And I thought, all right, this is it. This is it. What is the elevator speech? What is it that I'm going to say? So I had a chance to visit with Mike Dombeck and Jack Ward Thomas over breakfast one day, and Mike said, I want you to write me a letter and tell me what it is that I need to do. I have a copy of that letter here. I thought you guys might like to hear at least a piece of it. Mike, when in Missoula a couple months ago, you asked me to identify specific actions that you could take to reestablish the Forest Service as leaders in wilderness stewardship. Enclosed is my response to your request. As you noted in your remarks at the North American Wildlife and Natural Resource Conference, we can take great pride in the contributions that Arthur Carhart, Aldo Leopold, and Bob Marshall made regarding establishment of wilderness. However, we can no longer stand in the shadow of these great conservation leaders. We must boldly step out and assume our place in the history of the wilderness movement. We must seize this moment on behalf of the American people to reestablish leadership in wilderness stewardship and redeem our responsibility to ensure an enduring resource of wilderness. This means more than reinstituting a field advisory group and blah, 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 blah. On and on I went, and I said, it will take your personal leadership. As chief, you must provide tangible evidence that wilderness is critical to our natural resource agenda. By paying attention to wilderness through your use of time, attention, decisions, actions, allocations, questions, and measurements, you will challenge others within and outside the Forest Service to focus their energy and effort on wilderness. Thank you for the opportunity to share these thoughts. I stand ready to help, blah, blah, blah. It was Leopold who said once, a conservation is one who is humbly aware that with each stroke he is writing his signature on the face of the land. Mike, as a conservationist, it's time for you to write your signature on the face of wilderness. If not now, when? If not who? That was my shot. I had a shot and I took it. And it scared me to death. I'm not going to lie, because you could get in trouble for telling the chief what to do. You could get in trouble for suggesting that you're not doing what you should be doing. You could get in trouble for saying we're slipping and it's unacceptable. Arthur Carhart could have gotten in trouble for saying this is a bad idea. So you get that first point, you guys? The first point is you've got to speak truth to power, and you've got to take advantage of those opportunities when they come. Second idea. Before establishment of the Carhart Center, how many of you had ever heard of Arthur Carhart? Anybody? Anybody? How many of you thought that it's the Carhart Clothing Company? Yes. That's what I thought, and I thought we're going to make bank. We're going to have our own cool uniforms, you know. No. That has a second T on the end. No. So why is it? By contrast, how many of you have heard of Aldo Leopold? Why? What did Aldo Leopold do? Bingo. What an amazing writer, right? Researcher. His influence, His network was broad and it was deep. By contrast, not so much with Arthur Carhart, right? So, if you are surrounded by people who are more talented than you in their writing ability, their speaking ability, their connections, their networks, why would you withhold your brilliant ideas?
They're going to steal it.
Ooh. They're going to steal it, and what else?
Who gets the name on it?
Who gets the name on it? And that matters why?
The government.
Okay? I submit to you it doesn't matter, unless you're in research and then, you know, publish or perish kind of a thing. The notion here is simply this. Arthur Carhart couldn't have made happen what Aldo Leopold made happen. And if Arthur Carhart hadn't shared his idea with managing lands in a natural state, if he hadn't reached out with help from his boss, who knows how long it would have taken before we would have had wilderness codified, you guys. So the notion here is you've got to know your tribe. You've got to find your tribe, and you've got to spend time with your tribe, and you've got to work with them, and you've got to not be afraid to share your brilliant idea, especially if you don't have the skill and the network and the ability to make it happen. I fall in that category. I have brilliant ideas, like, all the time. All the time. But that doesn't mean I can implement them. It doesn't mean they should be implemented. So you surround yourself with people who can either say, that's a brilliant idea, the time is not now, or that idea is really stupid, or that is a good idea, let's see what we can do to make it happen. So I encourage you not to be afraid of getting your idea stolen. If you're worried about that, you might be in the wrong business. So I just want to share that with you. Carhart wasn't recognized for his role in wilderness until 1973. Remember when he started? 1919. So he's 81 years old. And he says, I really didn't know that I was such an important person. I'm gratified by all these kind words. This work has been my whole life. I sometimes wonder how I had the nerve as a young punk to get my supervisors turned around on some of these things. I feel real good about how it's all turned out. The Forest Service has come a long way, and I'm proud to have been associated with it in those early days. I used to have, you know how you have a tagline, what do you call that thing in your signature block on your email, whatever tagline? I used to have a tagline, my favorite one, Rudyard Kipling, the power of the pack is the wolf, and the power of the wolf is the pack. You got to know when it's time to lead out on your own, and you got to know when it's time to go with everybody else. And the only way you know that is when you spend time together with the pack, with the tribe. So I was going to try to weave in some other resources for you guys to, you know, I'm not making this stuff up. I am, but this is from my own experience, right? But what you need to know is that it's backed up and it's validated by some really brilliant writers, more brilliant than I am. Anybody hear of Brené Brown? Woohoo! One of my favorite books of Brené Brown is Braving the Wilderness, The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. And she has 4 really, really important, maybe 5, areas that we need to focus on. And in that first one that I talked about, Speaking Truth to Power, you're going to love this. The way she phrases it is, call out bullshit and be civil. Okay? In this one, what she says is hold hands with strangers. That's what this hold hands with strangers. Another resource that I have found that has led me through really difficult times is the Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner. And what they did a research of 20,000 different individuals, leaders, and followers in every continent, and asked essentially one question: what makes you follow somebody? What makes a good leader? And it didn't matter what country they were from. What they found out is that every time what people would follow was the exact same thing, pretty much in the exact same order. But in this one, what they have to say that validates this is you need leaders enable others to act. Okay? Enable others to act. Okay. So, what was your first one? Speak truth to power, right? Second one, find your tribe and share your ideas. Third one, do we have anybody in the room who is either or a marathon runner, a long-distance swimmer, long-distance kayaker, long-distance hiker, long-distance rafter? Anybody in here? Okay. What do you do? Backpacking. What do you do?
Used to be marathon running, now long distance walking.
Right on. Right on. What else? Anybody? We had over here. Hikers, right? Backpackers. Yeah, these guys are brutes. Okay. They're boss, man, I'm telling you. I know them. How do you train for long distance differently than short sprints? Any different? Is it the same?
Yeah.
Do you train the same for a sprint that you do for a marathon? No. You just keep going. Bill, how do you train differently for long distance than short? What she said. Just keep going. Okay, you have to build up that endurance, right? And that takes time. And it's not just a sprint and then, go have a beer and another sprint and go have a beer. It doesn't quite work like that. I've done 4 marathons. I know just a little bit about that. The challenge here is that Carhart laid out a plan for managing Trapper Lake in its natural condition in 1919. It was not designated as a primitive area until 1932, 18 years later. He laid out a similar plan for the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, in 1919, and it didn't become a wilderness until 1964, 45 years later. Lesson here. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon, and I actually like to view it as it's a marathon relay, okay? And you get to do part of that relay, and then you have to hand that torch to the next person, and they do their marathon, and they hand it to the next person, and there it goes. The whole point here is that if you approach this as a sprint, you will flame out, and I can speak from personal experience that that's true. I thought when I started with the Carhart Center, how hard can this be? Duh, you got one wilderness, you got 4 agencies that manage it, you bring them all together and you do good stuff. And then in a couple hours I'll move on to the next thing. That's not how it worked. And it was really brutal when you find out how hard it is and you wonder, why am I doing this anyway? So you got to pace yourself, and along with that, you got to ask and answer the question, what is your why? What is your why? And I was asked this question many, many, many years ago, why do you do what you do? And I hemmed and hawed about all sorts of things, and I finally realized I was just wasting time. And I realized that there is nothing new under the sun. And so I just pulled out something that I carry with me all the time that would help me explain to people and express to people, why do I do what I do? Ooh, it's getting kind of ragged. Here was my why. Strange is our situation here on earth. Sometimes each of us come for a short visit not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to a divine purpose. From the standpoint of daily life, however, there's one thing I do know. We are here for the sake of others, for the countless unknown souls with whose state we are connected by a bond of sympathy. Many times a day, I realize how much my own outer and inner life is built upon the labors of people, both living and dead, and how earnestly I must exert myself in order to give in return as much as I have received. Albert Einstein, when asked, what is the meaning of life? We stand on the shoulders of giants. The Arthur Carrs that have gone before us, the Aldo Leopolds that have gone before us, the federal employees that are sitting in this room because they don't have a job right now, the people out in the field wishing that they were out in the field. We do what we do for the sake of others and for the sake of the land that belongs to them. It's sacred. It's holy. What's your why, y'all? You got to answer that question. And with that, that's the first three. Did I get them all? Know your why and pace yourself. I got that right? Okay. Now, we're going to move through to another different section here. How many of you can tell me how tall the Statue of Liberty is? Anybody know how much it weighs? I bet you'll get this one. What's it made of? I knew you'd get that one. Good job. Good job. Okay, the Statue of Liberty isn't important because it's 151 feet tall, it weighs 225 pounds, and made of copper. That's its characteristics, right? It is important because it is one of our nation's primary symbols of the greatest aspect of America, and that would be freedom, right? In light, despite everything going on as we speak, give me you're tired, you're poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse from your teeming shore, bring these, the homeless tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my light beside the golden door. America is about freedom. In 1964, Congress passed two pieces of critical legislation. One was the Wilderness Act and the other was the Civil Rights Act. Crazy! How is it, how remarkable is it that in the exact same year, this country sees fit to set aside land, a little tiny, tiny piece, so it could be free. And it said, in order for people to thrive, they have to be free as well. I know that that wasn't a planned deal, but that is pretty dang awesome, don't you think? The whole point here, upon signing the Wilderness Act, President Johnson said, "So it seems to me that this reflects a new and strong national consensus to look ahead, and more than that, to plan ahead. Better still, to move ahead. We know that America cannot be made strong by leadership which reacts only to the needs or the irritations or the frustrations of the moment. True leadership must provide for the decade, not merely for the next day." That's what wilderness stewardship is all about. Wilderness is preserved for its symbolic meaning of humility, restraint, and interconnectedness with nature. And just like the Statue of Liberty, wilderness is the tangible representation of the intangible core value that is quintessentially American, and that is freedom. What does that make wilderness managers? Freedom fighters, exactly. Guardians of freedom. Somebody else told me, wilderness warriors is another one that people came up with. And again, I want to say, you know, I'm not making this stuff up. We have a signature course at the Carhart Center. It's the only one where people actually come to Montana. Everything else is distributed to where it's needed to happen. And it's for national level leaders in all 4 agencies of the federal government, of wilderness stewardship, and the military. Why the military? Any guesses? Why would we have the military come to a wilderness training course? Who has stewardship over airspace? Yeah, federal government and the military, and especially across wilderness areas. And who has management responsibilities at the borders? Homeland Security, Border Patrol. Okay, so we invite those people to come so that they can understand and know about what wilderness is all about, and maybe take back to their shops. We can do what we do, and we can do it with honor and respect to these places. So at this training session, there was a major, a Marine Corps major, and I don't know how it is that he was a pilot. Was he not a pilot? He was a pilot. And he was a trainer. And he came to our course, and we were going to have another one similar to it in the Desert Southwest, which is right where his base was. And he asked the Carhart Center representative, could he teach the Wilderness Act component of the course? And this was Chris Barnes, the BLM representative to the training center. He walks into my office and he says, this guy wants to do this. Should I let him do it? And I said, Chris, your course, your call. I'll back you up, whatever you want to do. And so he lets the guy do it. And he said it was the most inspiring thing imaginable. Here's this, I mean, he's this big unit, you know, and he's got on his dress whites, and he's got all sorts of medals on and the whole deal. And he stands up there and he does the whole thing about the Wilderness Act and what it means and why it's important. And here's his colleagues in the room, and here's Border Patrol in the room, and here's wilderness managers in the room. And he gets to the end and he says, I traveled the world helping the world fight for freedom in their countries. If I were to come home and wilderness wasn't here, what's the point of me fighting? I need to have these places for my 6-year-old to go and see what it's like to connect. So that is where we come up with this notion that it's very, very important for you guys to appreciate that you are or you will become guardians of freedom. Wilderness warriors. What was the other one? Freedom fighters. Okay? That's something deeper and more meaningful than what's the wilderness character identifier on field number 12. I don't know, whatever it is, you know, and you're writing that stuff down. It's easy to get lost in that. What's important is that you hang on to an inspired vision. And you can find that in these books as well. So, that was the second part. Here's the third part. We're winding down here. General Bruce Clark was Commander-in-Chief. He was stationed in the Republic of Korea in 1980. And he tells the story that early one Saturday morning, he was up walking around, and he runs into this young congressman. And he's there visiting as part of this delegation, and the general asks him, "What in the world are you doing up at this hour?" And he says, "Well, I'm checking on morale." "Oh, really?" says the general. "What is it that you're checking in order to determine what morale is?" He goes, "Well, you know, are they getting their mail in a timely fashion? Are they hearing from home?" And the general says, "You know, that's important. That really is important, that they hear from home and all of that. But that's really not what morale is all about. What else are you looking at?" "Well, how's the food? You know, do they get good food?" And the general says, you know, that's important too, that they're well fed. Is there anything else that you're looking at? And the young congressman says, well, yeah, what about recreation? Do they have places that they can go to let off steam and all that sort of thing? And the general goes, yeah, they do. But that's not what morale is about either. The general says morale is about 3 things. Knowing that you have an important job. Knowing that you do it well. And knowing that somebody cares. Those are the 3 components to what high morale is all about. So many years passed. General hadn't thought of that conversation in decades. And out of the clear blue one day, he gets a letter from the now former congressman that read, Dear General Clark, I just wanted to write and remind you of a visit we had many years ago when you were the commanding officer in Korea. I want you to know that I've given a great deal of thought to the subject of morale, especially lately. And after all these years, I now realize that you were quite right. Morale is indeed made up of 3 things. Knowing that you have an important job, knowing that you're doing it well, and knowing that somebody appreciates it. The letter was written from the Oval Office of the White House, and it was signed by Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States. So, you have an important job, or you're going to have an important job. We heard that, we figured that out when we talked about being a freedom fighter. When you hear somebody in the military stand up with his dress whites on and say, we have to have these places, they're important, you kind of know you got an important job. And you have your own reasons why it's important. And we could dive off into that, but we don't need to do that tonight. It's pretty clear when you have a group of people like this in here. Number 2, know that you're doing it well. Are you? That's going to be your call. That's going to be up to you. And there's a challenge, as we discussed early on. It's easier to speak truth to power when you're young and you don't have a lot of responsibilities, and it's harder when you get older. And it's especially harder when you get older if you let this happen. If you get hard on the inside, or if you turn to mush. It's hard. So it's critical, I think, that you understand that someone appreciates it. And I want you to know how I know that. How do I know that someone appreciates wilderness and why it's important? So I want to share with you a little essay that I got from an 18-year-old young lady following a 2-week immersion in wilderness as part of her incoming freshman orientation program. She says, I was so ready to go back to the real world, but I know that I will miss this place. I'm going to miss the freedom of not caring what I look like, even though I haven't showered in 19 days and I know my eyebrows have grown in and my hair looks like something is living in it. I will miss the quiet solitude that comes without TV, a cell phone, a computer, the constant noise that surrounds my everyday life. That's not to say that, I will miss the relationships I've developed with my peers the most. That's not to say that I still won't be friends with them, but I'll miss the way our relationship is out here. Because in wilderness, you're allowed to be the most you possible. Out here, life is simple, minimal, more natural. You're allowed to think things and have experiences you'd get nowhere else, and that's what wilderness is all about. It's about providing an environment in which we can be our truest selves, untainted by everything that corrupts us or clouds our judgment in the modern world. Out here, you're forced to face your fears, conquer your insecurities, and be surrounded by your own happiness. Because when you're alone in wilderness, that's what it comes down to. We have to preserve places like this. for future generations, because without them, we will have nowhere left to go to obtain that sense of complete open-mindedness. Everyone needs wilderness because everyone needs an escape. And if wilderness is lost, I'm afraid that the very foundations of humankind, freedom, truth, and equality, will be lost as well. Backpacking is not my thing. It never has been, and I don't think it ever will be. But experiencing wilderness in its purest form is a necessity. It resets us, it redirects us, it rejuvenates us in the most unique way possible. Some people need to spend hours, days, weeks in the wild to feel that, and others may only need to look out their front door and see the mountains. But in the end, we must all be aware that there's something much greater than we are out there, and within it, we may find refuge. You guys are going to grow up, and some of you are going to work in wilderness, you're going to work in conservation, it doesn't matter what it is. And you're going to get discouraged. You may even get furloughed. Who knows? And when you do, you need to understand that even when all that happens, people care. Somebody cares. And if you can hang on to that truth, if you can hang on to that fact, if you can spend time with, find your tribe, and hang with them, you're going to be okay. You're going to be better than okay. You're going to be brilliant. Where's my Wilderness Act, Tim? There it is. This is a sacred promise to the American people. A promise that although rare, there will always be places where a tree can rot where it falls, where a waterfall can pour its curve without making electricity, where a trumpeter swan can float on uncontaminated water, and that there will always be a place where one can be alone and find refuge from the sights and the sounds of modern civilization and reconnect with earth to find healing, meaning, and significance. If you haven't figured it out yet, wilderness transcends generations, it transcends abilities, it transcends ethnicities. It is the land that was, wild land before the frontier, land that shaped the growth of our nation and the character of our people. Wilderness is the land that is rare, wild places where we can retreat from the sights and sounds of modern civilization and find healing, meaning, and significance. Because in wilderness, we can be free. In wilderness, when you bring your A game and you don't let anything discourage you, you're going to be coffee. Guys, I thank you so much for your time, your attention. And if you have questions, questions or observations or anything. And there's other people in this audience that know a whole lot about wilderness if you want to ask those questions too. Mm-hmm.
Something in your day-to-day life, your day-to-day routine that prevents you from becoming a boiled carrot?
Gratitude. Yeah. Every day I wake up and I think about what I'm grateful for and the blessings that I have. And if I focus on that instead of, oh, I got this crisis, I got this problem, because you are what you think. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So if you dwell in the negative, you will become negative. You will become bitter, and you will become resentful, and you will fall off the cart. And I'm speaking from experience. So gratitude is my go-to every time. Great question. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I've read a lot about 19th century frontier literature in the American West. And Native Americans sometimes were puzzled and couldn't understand how white people saw the lands where they had not settled as wilderness and wild and fearful and dark and uncivilized, whereas Native Americans saw it as their home, their homeland, the creation that they were a part of. So you have this dichotomy between the Euro-American sense of what the wildness really stood for and what Native people saw it as.
Indeed.
What's your response to those two dichotomous views?
Yes, that's true. Yes, it's true. We have white settlers that came in to conquer, and we had Native Americans that were like, what are you conquering? We live here. And I'm not going to get into all the horrific things that we did. There's efforts about, and have been for some time, to try to rectify that and allow and provide opportunities for Native Americans to, sort of reclaim? I don't know if that's the right word. An example I have to offer is a fellow that worked for the Carhart Center was able to put together a healing ceremony between Salish Kootenai and folks that cared for congressionally designated wilderness in what was their former lands. And it was an incredible opportunity for leadership for the Native Americans, as well as the leadership from the wilderness managing organizations, to reconcile and appreciate that what was, and what is how we move forward together to take care of these places, because they are sacred, they are holy, whether you're white and believe it, or you're Native American and believe it. Don't know if that helps, but anybody else? You're too easy, Joanna. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your time.